Kelvin Sanchez, the best game in the last Tunnelvision tournament in Colombia Chess Club. Okay, let's start with the game. The game that I choose today, it's the game between Brandon Nicholas Tregde against Tanay Sanghani. Tanay Sanghani is one of the best player in South Carolina by in the elementary school. So okay, let's begin with this game. So the idea is d4, okay, knight f6, knight f3, d5, okay, and bishop f4. Okay, the white it's starting right now with the London system. Okay, this position is interesting. It's regular options. Right now, the black has, I think the best option normally is to play c5. Even I have good experience with this idea. Other option that some players prefer is to play simple g6. Other players prefer to play the pawn on c6. Okay, we have different options. Or the option that I use in this case is the pawn on e6. Okay, the idea is to move the bishop on d6, and then the black player will be fighting in this game to dominate the e5 square. Okay, so the possible game can continue. Well, in this case, it continue with e3, bishop d6, and bishop d3. For example, if the white capture right now, normally the black capture with the queen, and then the main plan is to use the knight d7 and e5. So right now, the white can continue with c4, c3, short castle, knight d2, and now knight d7. And in this knight d7, e5 is not possible to be avoid. So the white cannot avoid e5. So and when they play bishop d3, e5 immediately, it's getting advantage for black. Okay, normally the black has very good domination in the center. They can play c5. If it's necessary, they can play b6 and bishop to b7. And this solution is very, very interesting. Instead that, so bishop g3, and now bishop g3, short castle, and knight d2. Okay, it's regular. This is the type of the develop in the London system. Right now, the white it's avoiding to play c3 because I think that they don't decide where the pawn will go. It's possible to go c3. It's possible to go c4. In both cases, the white has very good possibilities. So it's obvious if they play c4, they transfer the position in a queen gambit. Okay, with the bishop side of chain located on g3 now. It's okay. So after this, queen e7 and bishop d3. And now knight d7. Other option interesting here is to play simple c5. And after c3, knight c6. And once the white play the knight on e5, they can simply move the knight on d7. Okay, this is an interesting option. The white player can simply capture on d7. And after bishop takes d7, playing options like bishop takes d6, queen capture d6, and f4. And this option is very interesting because the white will be using the e5 square. So this bishop is better than the bishop on d7. Okay, so we have some attack in this way. Even I have seen some videos about the London system because this is not my favorite opening, right? But in this case, it's like we can find plans like, for example, rook c8, knight f3, and if the imagine like the black play in ground way like a6. So this is the typical plan: take, knight g5, and use the Greek gift. Okay. After this, simple h4, h5, queen d3 or queen c2, even queen g4 is possible. So I think that this option is a known position. Okay, it's not difficult to analyze. But it's okay. It's the typical plan that they use in the London system. Other option is instead to play f4, is to capture on c5. And when the queen captures c5, now bishop take h7 is other way. King capture h7, queen on h5 check. And after the king move, simple knight e4. Okay, it's using this pin, okay, with the pawn on d5 because the queen is hanging. And now the knight is going on g5 attacking h7. This is a very, very interesting idea, and it has been played before. Even we have a game between Sam Chanklam with black against Gata Kamsky, and Gata Kamsky is one of the best players with this system where the black play the queen c4, now knight g5. Now let's imagine like rook f to d8. And after this, I assume that queen capture f7, king h8, queen goes to h5, king on this square, and queen h7 probably. And with the queen on h7, we have different players that got advantage there. Other players use, for example, rook d1, okay, as the game between Sam Shankland and Gata Kamsky. And after that, e5. And after e5, queen f7, king on h8, and now e4, okay? And this is an interesting position, okay? So the main plan is at some point, at some time, to move the pawn, the rook, and pass the rook. Right now, the pawn is taking here, and the white will have enough compensation. So in that game, the black continue with knight e7, simple queen capture e7, bishop to b5, threatening checkmate, rook d2, and now queen capture a2 is threatening queen a1 or threatening queen b1, and simple queen f7. So queen a1, rook d1, queen take b2, attacking against c3. But in this position, the game is very interesting for white. So in this game, let's see. For example, in this game, the game continue with queen take b2, okay? So queen h5, king g8, queen h7, and after this queen g8, queen h8, queen capture g7, and it's basically cleaning the position. So king d6, rook take d5, and when he move queen f6, and the position is totally loose. When they go, for example, queen c7, simple rook capture here, queen capture here, rook capture d5, knight e6 is winning, so it's very, very easy to win that game. This is the reason because Shankland resigned in this position, okay? But then, this is a typical plan. It's complicated to analyze because based on the level of the players, it's difficult to analyze there that long variation. But it's an interesting idea. Instead that, Tanay used the knight on d7, okay? Knight bd7. And after this knight bd7, the plan is to play e5 and now knight e5. With the knight e5, the white is using the knight on e5 to try play the pawn on f4, okay? Following exactly the same idea. So c5, c3, and now bishop take e5. Normally, this is not the good move. It's bad idea. So they play g6. It's much better to play g6. And after g3, if f4, so the knight can go on h5, attacking against the bishop. And now queen g4, and the queen will be located in the h file, and it's possible to generate initiative, okay? So it's like f5, queen h3, knight take g3, and capture with the pawn. This capture is interesting because against this type of structure, we need to attack against the pawn chain. When you are attacking against the pawn chain, it's necessary to attack against the pawn in the top of the pawn chain or attack the pawn in the bottom of the pawn chain, okay? So in this case, the top of that pawn chain is the pawn on f6, the pawn on f5, or the pawn on h7. Once you define that, you can, for example, attack against the pawn on f5 in double time. It's like you can move the pawn on g4, you can capture, and then you can move again the pawn on g4. This is the reason because the white can consider the double pawn in the g file, okay? It's an interesting option. Instead that, for example, bishop take e5, and after bishop take e5, d take e5. The d take e5 is attacking the knight. Now the bishop, we have the bishop attacking against h7, but we don't have all the conditions to use the Greek gift, because to apply the Greek gift, we need the knight to jump on g5, and this situation doesn't happen because the queen is protecting that square. And other possibility is when we have the rook on h1, we can use the pawn on h4 to protect that square and pass the rook throughout the third rank, okay? So it's like you have different possibilities to use the Greek gift, and this is an interesting strategy, okay? It's typical in the London system. Here, to destroy this defense right now, probably we can try to use this bishop here, pawn here, but these are a little risk, okay? The white should try to attack in this way, and it's not easy because they will be forced to stay with the king on the center or moving the king to the short side, okay? So it's complicated. Instead that, e4 is other interesting idea in the London system because you can pass the knight, okay? So remember that we need to include the pieces on the king side to generate initiative against h7. After d4, okay, now f4, and with the f4 we are breaking the position with the f5, So if the black play this line with the f5, we can simply use the short castle, and now the king will be safe on h1 because this pawn is blocking this diagonal, for example, and then we can try to play the pawn on g4. So, or we can capture here, pawn capture, and the bishop will be using different diagonal. And instead to attack on h7, we are attacking in the diagonal between a2 and g8, and we don't need to use the pawn on g. If we don't use the pawn on g, the king on g1 will be safe, okay? It's very clear. So after rook b8, for example, an easy plan, this capture, c takes d4, take on d4, and bishop c4. And after this, knight f3, okay, the knight is jumping on this square, moving the bishop here, the queen is passing, the rook will be able to pass throughout the f3 and h3. So we have many options. And after a6, bishop h4, and this is a rook c1, and the advantage for white is decisive because we have a very interesting position in the attack with initiative. We are threading this, moving the bishop, the rook is attacking the queen. Okay, so with this square attack, this is the typical plan that you should use in this type of position, okay? Okay, from now, that means that instead to play h4, as we mentioned before, or instead to play e4, okay, to attack between the different diagonals, so the white prefer to play f4, okay? f4 is an interesting option that we'll be trying to play f5 at some point, not right now, okay, but it's the possible move that give the option for white to pass the rook throughout the third rank, okay? So moving the rook on f3, moving the rook on h3, this will be an interesting option. Instead, after that, c4, attacking the bishop, bishop c2, bishop c2, and after bishop c2, f5, okay? So with the f5, is blocking the diagonal of the bishop. Imagine that now the black, for the white, for example, capture here on f6. The black can simply capture with this knight on f6, and in the next move, it's possible to play the pawn on e5. Okay, and after the pawn on e5, so they will be improving the position of the bishop from the c8. Okay, if it's not necessary, they can simply move b5, b4, and move the bishop throughout b7. And it's another possibility, okay? But in general, this is the idea that the black is trying to do. It's to active the piece to move the bishop outside of the pawn chain. Or, okay, and this was the situation that happened, close the diagonal for the bishop on c2 to attack against h7. Now it's not easy, okay? In this position, it's not easy to attack against the pawn on h7. But one of the conditions that we can use is the breaking move with the pawn on g4, okay, attacking with the pawn's turn on the king side to try open files, okay? In this case, we can open files, or if the white capture with the pawn on f, we are opening files at the same time that we are opening the diagonal for the bishop on c2. So I think that this option, it's good for now, but in the future, if the black doesn't play faster, like moving knight c5, knight e4 to try to block the diagonal, I think this will be a problem. And this was the situation that happened in the game. So instead e take, now knight f3, okay? The white play knight f3, okay? The knight on f3 can go on d4, can go on g5. So after knight c5, bishop h4, attacking against the queen. And now queen c7 and pawn g4, okay? This is what I was explaining, no? The idea is now to attack against the pawn on f5, and this pawn will be hanging, this pawn will be hanging, and the attack for white is really strong. But, for example, if he played g6, now we can simply capture here, and if he capture here, queen capture d5, it's okay, because you can move the queen back and knight d4, and all the position will be blocked. Or if he play g take f5, now the rook g1 and the g file is open. Okay, so the queen will be passing in this way throughout the g file. So the long castle will be present. The knight can go d4 or g5. So in this position, the white will have an important advantage. So instead that, f take g4, and after f take g4, the white start with the attack. Okay, after knight g5. So it's much better to consider knight d4, okay? Because when the knight goes on d4, the knight is attacking, it's planning to support the push of the pawn on f5, And now equals the queen will be taking on g4 and passing the rook throughout the f file, okay? The g file, sorry. And in this case, the attack is more easy because the knight is participating in the attack. So after rook b8, for example, a basic move, so queen capture g4, b5, because it's necessary to play b4. Now, if we use the lone castle, he can play b4 faster and he will be attacking against b2. This is a little danger for white. So, but if the white use short castle, now this possibility is present yet, while the knight on d4, the knight is on d4, the pawn on d5 is blocked, and then this option is not a risky position with the king on h1 and passing the rook throughout the g file, okay? So this is a very interesting possibility for white to begin the attack. So after b4, capture on b4, okay, f5, and the start and the attack is beginning, no? After pawn capture, probably bishop take f5, and we are attacking. So that means that knight d4 is a little better than knight g5, but instead knight d4, the white play knight g5, and after g6, now queen capture g4. The key is that now we are attacking this pawn with the two pieces, okay, and we are taking the pawn back on g4. If he play, for example, the pawn on h6, okay, when the pawn goes on h6, now bishop h7 is good, and after king h8, queen capture g4, sacrificing the knight, because after capturing capture the knight on g5, simple, bishop on g6 is blocking the pawn on g7, and the queen on h7 is the queen on h5 is giving checkmate immediately. So that means that g6 is forced, now queen capture, and now knight d3 check, okay? This is a good strategy because Tanay is forcing the exchange of the bishop, okay? But here, probably this is part of the problem in this game, that the white player didn't have enough experience, okay, playing this type of position. But instead to simplify, okay, because if you simplify, you are doing exactly the same plan that your opponent is planning, okay? So after you capture on d3, c takes d3, for example, the white can try to access in this way to defend, okay? So b5, b4 is attacking against the pawn on c3 if you use the lone castle, situation that happened in the game. But if you analyze deep in the position, technically the knight is not doing anything there. And we can begin the attack after king e2. And now we can say, oh, but king b2 is a crazy move. It's really, really bad move, because in this way, it's like you are keeping the king on the center. But the king is safe on the center when the center is closed, okay? So if you analyze this position, probably the black can break the position with the pawn on d4, but the black will be forced to sacrifice material, and they don't have access against the king immediately, okay? Because all the square, the light square, are dominated. So that means that he cannot access to attack against the white king. But the idea is, like, for example, the black will be playing in this way to try block the position, and now knight take h7. So king capture h7, rook g1, passing the rook that is not active, okay, attacking against g6, and then the idea is to move the other bishop to push the pawn h4, h5. So then and now the white will have interesting attack. So after this, queen f7, bishop f6, and after a6, for example, a bad move, so we can play queen h4, and when he moves, queen h6, and now we are accessing with all the pieces throughout the g file. So the attack is straight, basically, okay? Instead, king g8, knight h5 is the other option, but after knight h5, rook g5. Now the knight is pinned, and the idea is to play with the other rook here to try capture and simplify the position. It's like rook g8, rook g1, now rook b8, other basic move. It's basic move, but it's not necessarily, okay? I am showing just which is the idea for white, with a basic move for black. The black could play bishop d7, b5, blah, blah, blah. But this is the idea for white. Capture on g6, and when the queen capture on g6, simple rook capture on g6, and after king capture on g6, queen g4 and queen take h5. So then when the king move, for example, we can simple, I don't know, play queen h7 and he's winning in this queen e7 or queen g7 and blah, blah, blah. So this is the attack. The attack is really straight, and it's very good because the black cannot defend the game very well. But the key is that now bishop take d3 and c take d3, short long castle, and now knight g7. Okay, here is an interesting defense because after king e2, knight g5, take. Okay, one of the options interesting is to play with the bishop on d7. Okay, bishop on d7 here. It's interesting to try pass the bishop to this diagonal. But in this case, this check, knight here, rook here, and then the other rook is coming to g file too. So I don't know if this will be enough defense. Bishop g8, rook g file. So probably the rook here, because the key is that now after this capture, he can take with the queen, with the bishop. And now taking with the bishop, it's protecting the knight. So it's not similar. I think that the black has defense, but the white has an important pressure because the white can play, for example, after rook, instead that, probably, yes, they can try something like this f5, I think. It's interesting. But this position, or simple move the king. For example, move the king here and bishop d1 and attacking. So imagine like this, rook d8, instead rook take g6, for example, king here, and now bishop d1 and capture here. So it could be an interesting possibility to try force. Because imagine rook c8, bishop here. When he capture, for example, you capture here, pawn capture, and now simple rook g7. It's winning the position, or simple rook take g8. I think rook take g8 is enough. Rook take g8, capture, king capture, and queen g7, and queen g5, queen g7, and queen e7, okay? So the attack throughout the dark squares is really strong in this position, okay? After the sacrifice of the knight. So then, bishop d3, the white capture on d3, c take d3, long castle, and now knight g7. Other option interesting is to play simple b5, to play b4 as quick as possible. After rook take d3, b4, king b1, a5, and after rook c1, b3. What is the problem with this condition? That now the white is focusing, could be focusing the attack on the queen side. And technically, the queen side is not the sector where we need to play. So we need to play on the king side. Okay, so this is a possible idea. Now we are safe for possible attack for black player. And now bishop f2, and we can try to pass the pieces. Okay. So instead b5, the other idea is knight g7, and after knight g7, king b1. Okay, he played king b1. Other idea is rook h to g1. This is much better. After knight f5, simple rook take d3, and after queen e7, e4. And with the e4, he's trying to pass the rook. So after even this pawn capture is possible to play here, and now we are taking, and the rook and the rook on h3 and the rook on g1, combined with the queen on g4, it's are attacking against the king side with all the pieces. Check it out, the white has all the pieces attacking the king side. It's really strong. So then h5, and after queen h3, capture, and now rook h1, because we cannot pass the rook right now, but we can pass the rook in the future. So b6, knight f3, and after queen h7, well, we can decide knight here and capture, and try knight f6, and blah blah blah. Okay, or even, well, bishop f6 doesn't work, doesn't make sense because he can capture here. Probably this knight g5 is the best option to attack his queen. So then rook g1, rook h1 is an interesting idea, but now we can analyze that without this bishop, okay, knight take h7 doesn't make sense because we don't have the extra piece. So after this king capture, rook g1, if we apply exactly the same idea, okay, so queen f7, now bishop f6, knight h5, queen h4, bishop d7, rook g5, rook g8, and after rook g1, bishop e8, and now we don't have bishop d1. So check it like this is the difference between this position is exactly the same idea to attack after the sacrifice of the knight on h7. But in this case, the attack is not success because we don't have the possibility to use the bishop since d1. Because with the bishop on d1, we are forcing the attack. In this case, we don't have that option. So basically, this is the problem, okay? Now the white use king b1, the black use knight f5, bishop f2, h6, and now the white use an aggressive move. I am not sure if this is correct, but well, they try that, is knight take e6, okay? Sacrificing the knight against 2 pawns. After this, knight capture. Obviously, if he moved knight f3, this is much better. After queen h7, so we can simple play knight d4 or h4, h5, or simple moving the rook, blah, blah, blah. Or if queen f7, simple rook g1. After king h7, queen h3, threading knight g5 now, and now rook king h8, knight g5, queen g7, and e4, okay? So e4, when he captured, obviously, you can capture now, you capture with the rook here, moving the knight here, so moving the bishop on this square, so the position is really complicated for white, for black. And instead that, if knight e7, obviously you can continue your ideas, probably, I don't know, rook take d3, rook g3, and this position is interesting. Or simple bishop e3 first and rook capture d3 later. So we have different, or the black has different possibilities. Instead that, knight take, other idea is e4. Directly e4, capture on g5, capture on f5. But after rook take, it's like the rook is protecting everything, okay? So this attack is not correct. So then, knight take e6, bishop take, now queen capture g6, knight g7, and rook g1. Now the white will be applying pressure against this king, okay, with all the pieces. And the key is that in this position, the white has 5 pawns, the black has 7 pawns. So right now, the black has only 2 pawns against the knight, but with pressure, and the pawn on h6 is hanging, okay? So technically, in the endgame, we will be playing with 3 pawns against the knight, and possible 3 pass pawns. So bishop h5, queen capture h6, bishop h7, okay? It's not necessary bishop h7, probably b5, threading b4 as quick as possible. Okay, d2 is coming, so the queen is attacking too. So this is the idea to try generate counterplay. The white has advantage, but okay, the black is trying something. So bishop h7, and after bishop h7, bishop h4, passing the bishop throughout f6. So king h8, rook take d3. Rook take d3, I don't like that too much. Probably bishop f6 is much better right now. Yes, I think this option is much better right now. But he captured on d3, okay? Now, knight f5 and bishop f6. Capture, capture, knight here, and now queen c2. Because obviously, this is the reason because I didn't like the rook take d3, because the bishop is spinning the rook, and now he cannot move the rook. So he will be losing the rook. So then, rook g8, instead rook g8, probably b5, king d2, and simple capture here, queen c4, rook b4, and that type of position. And now after rook g8, he play king d2. This is a blunder, okay? So it's good. For example, if we play f5, so this is not clear because he can simply capture the pawn. But if we play queen h6, so now queen c4, and after f5, so the position is complicated in this case, okay? So that means that f5 is enough, okay? So if he capture here on f5, probably you can play e4, I think, and after bishop take, queen capture check, and after bishop here, rook h3 is not possible. I was thinking rook h3 in this case, but it's not possible. So then that means that probably e4 is not correct. Oh, but here you can play queen h4, bishop h7, and now queen capture h7. So, and after this capture, simple rook h3. Oh, but I think that this option is possible before. It's like queen h6, bishop h7. Yes, bishop h7 you can capture, no? Capture, capture, and rook h3. Okay, this was a winning position, okay? Yes, because after queen h6, he cannot do anything. So then probably against bishop e4, he will be forced to play bishop h7 first. And because if not, queen h7 is totally winning. Oh, but wait, after bishop take f5, we can do it immediately. Queen h6. Well, and after this, probably this move, it's possible. And passing the rook. I don't know, I think that e4 is much better first because e4 is attacking the bishop. So I think this is much better now. But instead, king d2, capture, capture, and now rook g8 and h4, okay? This is the interesting situation in this game because the black has a knight against 4 pawns. So the knight is and the knight is in one of the bad positions because the knight is playing only in one side, okay? Or maximum 2 sides of the chessboard. and the possible move are 50% of the mobility of the knight, basically. Okay, so after this, queen h4, queen d7. Queen d7 is threatening queen f5. So king d2, queen e7, and now queen h7, queen h6, king g8, and h5. Check it out, the white is advancing and the black is totally restrained. So this is an interesting game because, for example, this guy, Brandon, I think it's Brandon his name. Yeah, Brandon, it's not a high rated player respect to Tanay. The difference is around 200 or 300 points, or more than 300 between their rating, right? But the truth is that his level is very, very well, okay? So because right now, he just needs the patience, okay? The key is that in the tactical conditions, he have not been using the right move, okay? But right now, for example, the black is totally restrained and the position is really, really, really bad. So after this, rook f8, okay, queen g6, now king h8, rook g5. Rook g5 is to avoid knight f5, because if you play h6, knight f5, and now the queen cannot access. So, but now, rook g5 here, and after this h6, this is a mistake, okay? So I invite you to find the good variation to win, okay? You can stop the video and try to find the amazing move for white to win the position. So, and after that, if you stop and you try to find it, probably you found queen h6, and after king g8, queen d6. This move is amazing because now h6 is coming, the queen is attacking the queen, and the black cannot avoid the losing of material, okay? So after queen capture is forced, okay, imagine that he played rook f7, simple h6 is enough. Even you can capture, and h6 is enough to win. Okay, imagine, queen takes d6 is forced, pawn capture, now it's threatening this pawn, and after king goes on f7, rook takes d5. With the rook takes d5, now we can push the pawns, okay, pushing the pawn e45, the rook is winning the other pawn on d5, and Tanay will be playing basically with 6 pawns or 5 pawns against the knight. It's totally loose, okay? So after rook h8, d7, knight e6, e4, and after king here, probably, I don't know, f5 should be okay, f5, rook capture, and this position should be winning, okay? Okay, go back. So that means that in that position, the black is totally winning. But he played h6. h6 is bad because the knight is not doing anything. Once that the knight is on f5, well, the knight cannot go on f5 because he's taking. But after the knight is on e8, so it's like the plan is... we don't have more plan. We don't have queen d6. We cannot move this pawn. We cannot move this other pawn. So the position is really complicated. So a3, a5, queen b6, b4, take, pawn take, and after rook f7, b3, and after d4, queen capture d4. The white position is winning, but this variation is really, really difficult to be analyzed in this level. Because it's like basically the black is sacrificing all the pawns to try have a solid defense, but it doesn't make sense. So after knight e6, so rook f5. Instead rook f5, rook g2 is another option, threading f5, f4, f5, f6. So queen e8, simple b4, queen f7, take, and rook here, attacking the knight. And when the knight is moved, king here, okay? Because the idea is to move this pawn, and after to move this pawn, probably to move the rook, capture the pawn, move the king on d4 and capture the pawn on d5, and that way, the white will be getting enough material advantage to play against the knight. Instead that rook f5, rook g8, and now queen f7. And after queen f7, this is a bad move. It's much better queen f6, because queen f6 is forcing him to capture, and now you can capture. And after knight c, and when the knight goes on c5, I don't know, probably b4 is a good option. Oh, b4 no, because after this check, the rook is hanging. But I don't know, probably rook f7, it should be enough. Because when he plays rook g8, the king can move. After knight d3, king here, check here, and if he captures, now this pawn is promoting really fast. Because the king cannot move on this square by h7, but obviously this rook is hanging. They need to be careful. But imagine like after this move, they capture, again, it's the same. After this, king here, check, okay, and when the king goes here, e7, and the position is completely winning. So this position is totally lost for black. So the other idea, it's queen f7. This was the option, but here Tanay has the defense. Rook g2, really bad defense. The idea is this, queen f5, because now it's accessing with the rook. So check it, like, this is amazing position because the white doesn't have attack. So when the white capture here, the black can simple attack with check, and after this move, after this king d1, well, probably this check, and he's getting the draw because he cannot go with the light square, because simple check, 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 check all the time throughout g2 and g1. It's a draw. Instead that he played rook g2 first, king c1, really bad. The move is king d1, okay, because after queen c5, and this is the problem after king c1. After queen c5 now, rook g5, and after take pawn capture, and after queen g8, capture, capture, and king here, and the king is trying to simplify the pawns. Okay, 96 g6, and after this move, probably, I don't know, b4, and when he moved knight here, this, and now king here, and he's attacking the pawn, and he's winning the pawn back. Okay, so technically the white is winning again. So the truth is that in this end game, Brandon Hall has all the advantage all the time. But when they play king c1, this is bad by queen c5. Okay, here Tanay failed in the tactic because they were thinking that with this simplification is enough. But the truth is that advancing the pawn structure, the position is totally lost. Okay, so if he play instead queen f7, queen c5, now queen e8, and after king e8 capture, simple queen capture here, king c2, queen e4, and after his move, simple rook on this square. Because in this case, it's like when the king goes here, they can go simple queen a4 is made. Okay, so that means that queen e6 is a mistake. If they play queen g6, queen g8, it doesn't make sense because the queen is enough to win the position. Okay, so then he captured on f7, okay, and he has enough time. He used only 10 seconds probably to analyze this. It's really bad because we need to analyze which are the possibilities that we have against our opponent. So if he moved queen c5 after queen here, check. So I think that probably king here is enough, because after queen f7, so we can simply move the knight on g7. And this is amazing because we are trading checkmate in few moves, or he will be forced to sacrifice the queen. And when he sacrifices the queen, we can take, and now queen capture e3, queen e4, queen capture g7, king capture g7, and the position is totally lost again. So then, Tanay simple fail in this tactic after queen capture f7, rook take f7, knight c5, and now f5 is blunder. Because after f5, this is hanging, ping. So the only idea to win the game is king d1. Because with the king d1, the black doesn't have anything. So b4 is coming, and when the knight is moved anywhere, so you can push this pawn, and h7 is coming. So this is the key in this position. The white is winning with the pawn on e5 and the pawn on h6, not with the pawn on f5. So this is the reason because f5 is blunder. So after this, for example, if he moved the king here, you can simply capture here. You are trading h7 in the next move, and this is coming. So for example, this capture, h7, and when he moved rook here, if he move here, rook here, and when he moved the knight, so then now this pawn on f5 is good because he's not winning the pawn on f5, and he's not winning the pawn on e5. So then the king on d1 was the only solution to force the advantage in the position. Okay, so I assume that Brandon was a little scared to lose this position, but it's difficult to lose this position because the black doesn't have anything. The three pawns are failing. This pawn on a7 is lost, the pawn on d5 is lost, the pawn on b5 is also lost. They cannot move any pawn, they cannot create a pass pawn. So I think this was the time for Brandon to say, okay, I should have advantage because I have 4 pawns against the knight, and the knight is not doing anything. But when they play f5, it's simple hanging. This knight d3, king d1, knight take e5, rook take a7, knight d3, and then I force the draw. And this was a draw because the key is that the king cannot go anywhere. So because when he moved here, check, after this is bad because check, capture, and he's protecting the pawn. So this is a bad solution, okay? But if he goes, for example, on c1, after this check here, so the black can play this check here, and now, I don't know, rook f2. It's winning the pawn again because it's giving you mate. Okay, so king b1, he can capture here, is protecting, and now it's possible that the white lost the game, because the problem is that the white cannot do anything, and lost all the pawns. So then this is really, really bad. So this is the reason, because they simple allow the draw and by the repetition. Okay. Well, this is a game for this month in December 2025 in the edition of the Columbia Chess Club. Okay, with this Tunnelvision edition, and it will be all by today. Okay, I will be continuing the analysis of the game of the month in the next year in January. Okay, thank you very much, and I appreciate everything. Bye bye.